resume. Yeah, right. Okay. So before the timeout, there was a little question. There was a question about what did we mean by this try except. Now, um, supposing I wanted to do something, right? And I knew beforehand that there was a high chance of an error occurring whilst I'm doing that thing or while I'm attempting to do that thing. If if I didn't handle that error, my program will crash. I'll 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 show you an example. Um, sorry. I need to copy all of this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I removed the try and I removed the accept. Now this code is just, it's not doing anything special. It's the same thing, but without the try except. And what that means is I really don't care. I'm saying as I'm writing these functions, I don't expect any problem. I expect it to run and complete successfully, and tell me what I need to hear. Now, but the problem is that life is never like that in real life. Now you can see that I'm trying to access an item that is not in the list. Now, because it is not in the list, Python exits. You notice that because this error happened here, Python did not continue onto this place. And this is what we mean when we say the program crashes. The program crashed simply because I tried to access an item that was not in the list. Python tried, couldn't find it, and said, you know what, I give up. I don't know what to do going forward. So I'm going to end all of it now. And that is what happens. So we always, always, always try to prevent this from happening, because I don't think anyone will like it when you're trying to do a bank transfer and they tell you, oh, an error occurred, but your money has left the bank, it didn't get to its destination. Nobody would like that. So we always, always try to envisage errors that would happen and handle them so that the house doesn't come crashing down. So how do we do that? We do that by saying try, right? We are saying, I think this thing I'm going to do is going to throw an error, but I want Python to not crash. I don't want the program to crash when I'm doing this, right? Python, could you try to do this? If there was an error, which is what we mean by except, if there was an error, I want you to run the next line of code under the except. So print student is not a class member. Now, how does this work? We know that when you try to access something that is not in an array or a list, you would get a value error, right? You would always get an error if you try to access something that is not in a list. So we know that if this user is not in the list, this program will crash. But we don't want the program to crash. We simply want to be able to return back to the user and say the student is not in the class. So we say if there is an error while trying to get the student, the index of the student, then we just want, instead of everything crashing, we just want to return or print this message to the screen. Basically, that is what try except does. So you try something, if an error occurs, whatever you say should happen in the except body is what will happen, but your program will continue to run nonetheless. So in this case, you notice that because of the except, it didn't come crashing. It was able to run the first line and the second line. Now, okay, so let's go into loops. Now, I have students. Supposing I wanted to see every student in this, supposing they were 1 million, right? But in this case, I can't possibly type 1 million. Let's assume, just in your mind, just imagine that these students are 1 million. I could get all of it by saying print, right? Print students, right? And that would print everything, correct? I comment out everything here. So print students, right? Now, but suppose, just imagine that I wanted to print each student's number according to their position in this list. So this Peter will be number 1, Paul will be number 2, Thomas will be number 3, Timothy will be number 4. How can I achieve that? Right? Now to do that, I could say, this is, please don't do this, don't try this at work or anywhere. I could say print 1 and students 0, right? And print 2 at students 1, right? Print 3 at student 2. Now, if there were 1 million, I practically have to type this line for every item in that list, right? But one of the things we try to do in programming is we try to make the computer do all of the work, right? So it does not make sense that I'm going to have to type print for every item in this list. What if there was a way to say, you know what, take this list, for every item in this list, I want you to print their position and the name. That is what loops are used for. Loops allow us to iterate or go through every element in the list or an array and perform an operation. That operation, whatever happens, is completely up to us, but it just performs, it just allows us for a way to go through every item in the list. So let's assume I wanted to rewrite this with a loop. How would I do that? We start with the keyword for I in range learn students. Now, what does that mean? Okay, before we continue, let me introduce the range operator. So when we say print range 6, what happens? Range 6 simply means print all the items from 0 to 6, between 0 and 6. So between 0 and 6 means 0 to 5. 6 is not included, right? Okay, so before I get there, let's try this with just for I in range 6. Sorry. I want to print I. Now what this means is I'm saying for I in the range of numbers 0 to 6, I want to print it. I want to print that I. to the table or to the console. So this prints 0 to 5. Remember, I said between 0 and 6, it will include 0, the first item, but not the last item, right? So the same way, I could say for I in range 4 to 6, and this would print all the items between 4 and 6, 4 inclusive, 5 exclusive. So again, this will just print 4 and 5. The important thing to know is that range takes start, stop, and I think IJ produces I don't know, I'm not sure about this. Yeah, so okay. It takes a start, a stop, and an increment. Now it will start from here and it will end at the next number, the number before this one. Then I'm saying that I want, instead of counting +1, like adding 1 consecutively, I want it to add 2 instead. That is why you saw 4 plus 2, 6, 6 plus 2, 8. But since I said 8 is my stop, it would omit 8. Again, I could put 1 here and run, and you see that 4 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and so on and so forth. If I put 2 here, it will increment by 2. And if I put 3 here, it will increment by 3, right? If I put 4 here, it will increment by 4. Of course, it will only print 4, so on and so forth. So it's actually very straightforward. Now, but in this case, I'll take the students, I'll bring it closer here so that we can see it. Now, when looping through this array, I'm going to delete this. Now, if we look at this array, assuming we're going to loop through it, what are the things we need to put into consideration? We know that to go through the items in the array, I would go from 0, 1, 2, 3, right? But then this, for all I care, this array could contain 1 million items, right? So how do I know how many items are in the array? Remember, we said that the len operator will give you the length of the list, which is equal to the number of items in this array, correct? Now, so which means that I can take this length of students and use it as the upper bound of the range operator, right? So that will give me all the index positions of all the items in that student, in that list. You understand? So let's say I do this range 0 to 4. So which means that as far as this thing is concerned, I'm going to get the item at 0, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to say for I in range len students, print I. So what does that do for me? It means I'm going to get, it means that this for loop is going to provide me with I. And at every time it runs this thing, it is going to give me 0, which is the first item, 1, which is the second item, 2, which is the third item, and 3, index position 3, which is the fourth item. So for me now, but I don't need the index position. I need the item at the index position, right? So what does that do for me? How do I get that? Now remember we said that if we wanted to access an item at a specific position, we could say where did we do that? Now we could say, we could use the square brackets and pass in the index position. Now, but the index position is represented by I in this case. So if I wanted to, I would print students, and I want the item at index position I. Correct? Now what that would do for me is print Peter, Paul, Thomas, and Timothy. Supposing I wanted to print their positions as well, I would put I plus 1 and students I. So that will give me their number in this list, Paul, 3, and 4. Do we understand? I know it's kind of, I don't know if it's overload, but are we following? I mean, do you need me to explain slower?
Please go over it again. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I began with this. A loop is something that goes on and on and on and on until a certain condition is false, right? So a loop will continue for as long as a certain condition is true. Now, so the most important thing to know is that there must be a condition that evaluates to true, right? Then do this. Do the following, right? So for a condition that is true, do it. So it will keep doing this thing until the condition becomes false. So a loop will only exit when or stop when the condition is false, right? Now, so that means that if you started a loop, there has to be a way for the loop to stop. If not, your computer will hang, yeah, because it will keep running that loop and eating up memory. And so luckily, there are things to catch against that anyway. But the most important thing, again, I would say is there has to be a for, there has to be a condition, and then what we want to be done, right? So in this case, what are we doing? Okay, so let's assume that I had a list of students. Now, it could be a list of students, it could be the list of all the Swedish people, all Swedish citizens, or the list of everyone that has a personal number in Sweden. The most important thing to know is that as at the time you are writing that program, you don't know how many of such elements or people there are. You only know that all of them are in a list, right? For purposes of this program, right? So we know that we don't know how many they are, but we want to be able to generate a printable list of all those people, everybody that has a personal number in Sweden or a social security number in the UK, wherever. We don't know how many they are, but we want to print a list. Now, we want to print out those names on a sheet of paper. And we want to print them maybe in alphabetical order or whatever. It doesn't matter at this point. The point is, we don't know how many they are, but we want to print every person in that list out on a sheet of paper. And let's also assume that we have an infinite supply of paper for purposes of this. So how do we do that? Now I know that, let's assume that all of this is in this list, right? So if there are 11 million people in Sweden, that means this list has 11 million items, right, in this list. So I want a way to go through every item in the list. And for me to do that, I have to start from the beginning. Am I in a read-only editor? Why is that? Reload. Is there a Python 4? I don't think so. No changes received. Crazy. Okay. Okay. So, like I was saying, I needed to go through the first item, the second item. So I would go through this list in a repetitive manner. I would access the first item, then the second item, the third item, the fourth item, and so on and so forth. All right. Now, but I didn't want to have to manually say to the printer, print the first item, print the second item, print the third item, and so on and so forth. I need a way to get the computer to do the work of determining who is at the first position, print it, the second position, and so on and so forth, right? So for me to be able to achieve that, I need a loop. Now, but the thing is, my loop requires a condition, and I need that condition, I need to formulate that condition in such a way that when this printer gets to the end of the list, it will stop, right?
Yes.
Now, how do I achieve that? I'm saying that if we look at how we plan to achieve this, we can say the first item is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, until we get to the end of the array, right? So which means that the first item in this array is at index position. First item is at index position 0, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, what is the last item would be where? The last item will be at the last item will be at the last item, of course. That's, I don't know what
Last position.
at the last position. And how do we get the last position? Remember that the last position would be the number of items, number of items in the array minus 1, right?
Yes, sir.
So which means, remember, we also said that to get the number of items in the array, we will say len array. So this length tells me that there are 4 items in this array, but then the index of the last item in the array would be the total number of items minus 1. So remember, that is because indexes are 0 based. The first item is index 0, 1, 2, 3. So which means if there are 4 items, the last item will have an index position of 4 minus 1, 3, right?
Yes, sir.
So, which means also that if I wanted to count from index 0 to len to the length of the student minus 1, Python gives us a very easy way of doing that using the range operator. Now, or range method, sorry, it's not an operator. So this operator takes a start variable, so which means where is going to calculate a range of numbers for you, right?
Yes, sir.
Where would that range start from? That is what the first variable signifies, right? Now, where would that range stop, right? That would be the second variable. So we are saying start from here and stop at the item just before this guy, right? So if you say 1 to 5, it will count 1, 2, 3, 4, but not 5. So stop is exclusive. It is never in the result, right? And then there's a third variable that is the step. So by how much would it increment start until it gets to just before stop, right? So basically, that's what range does. So supposing we wanted to count for I for 0 to 100, or 100 and 100, yes, because I want to stop at 100. How would we do that? I'll simply do for I is a variable and it exists only for the duration of this loop. We'll talk about scopes, please. I hope I don't forget. Now I'm saying for this variable I in range 0 to 100. So I'm saying Python run what follows, which in this case is print I, run what follows this method repeatedly for each value of I in the range 0 to 101. Does that make sense? Meaning Python is going to run this for the initial value of I equals to 0. Python will run this again for I equal to 1, and so on and so forth until it gets to just before 101, right? So, how did this, okay. So as we can see, this is what we see here. We are saying Python prints every value of I from in this range of 0 to 101, which is what has happened here. I don't want to confuse you by adding that step, but we'll get to that. Now, let's get back to our example. We have a list of students that we can access by their index position. We know that the first item would be always index 0, right? We know that the last item will always be at the length, the number of items in the array minus 1, right? So if I want to go through the list of these students, I would simply do for I in range 0, right? Now, if the item is 0, you can omit it, but for clarity's sake, I'm going to leave it so that you will know what I'm doing or you would understand. And I want to stop at just before the number of items in students, which is 4, and the number just before 4 is 3. So I won't get an error here, right? So I'm saying for every item between index position, for every item within index position 0 and 3, Python prints me that student. Now remember, I can access a student, I can access an item in an array simply by saying variable, square bracket, and the position of the item I want. In this case, I want the first one. In this case, I want the second one. In this case, I want the third guy, and so on and so forth, right? So I'm saying Python, I want to go through the list of, I want to go through this array of students, and for every item between this and this, whatever this value represents, I want to print those students to the console, right? So what that does for us is that I will be, why is this web misbehaving today? How many minutes? 5 more minutes. Interesting. Did I print 0 to 100? No. Why do I see that? Shoot. Did I print something here? Unless it is interesting. Okay, let's just command this. Yeah. Oh, something is wrong. Reload. I don't know why they are misbehaving today. Just a moment, please. Failed to connect. Retrying. I thought as much. Yeah. Having a lot of problems today. Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's saved. So good. Now, so where did I stop? I said now what this loop does for me is it computes a range of all the items between the index of the first item and the index of the last item, and puts all of this in a variable for me to use down here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this loop, these print statements will run for as long as I is in the range of the first item to the last item, right? Now, supposing I wanted to also output this index or the position, I would do I plus 1. Why? Because I is just a variable. And if I run this, we would see that first person is Peter, second person is Paul, third person is Thomas, and the last person is Timothy, and so on and so forth. So I think there is another way, which is for I don't know, the I less than student. I don't know if that works here. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this does not work. This is purely JavaScript and Java and the rest. Anyway, so this is the way to write loops for loops in Python. Now there are 3 kinds of loops. There are for loops, and there are while loops, right? Now, supposing, I don't know if I have time to say this, supposing I didn't want to print in I didn't want to print the first student, right? What will I do? I didn't want to print the first student in this array. There are a few keywords that can help, right? I can say if I is equal to 0, continue. Now, what that means is that when Python gets to this line and evaluates I is equals to 0, and it sees this keyword continue, it will not attempt to run this statement. Now, if we run this, we would see that the first item is not printed. Now, supposing also that after doing this, if I want it to just print I want it to stop running the loop altogether. I don't want to see Timothy, right? How do I do that? I want to stop the loop. I want to stop Python from running the loop. How will I do that? There's a break statement for that. So, most important thing you should know, continue causes the loop to begin running immediately and ignore every statement after that continue, while break stops the loop